For the second exercise of the chapter, we're going to create a simple simulation, or at least the beginnings of a simulation, that involves priority queues and a square dancing scenario. So let's get started. We're going to call this program squaredance.java. First thing we need to do is import a couple of libraries. We need the priority queue library, of course, so that we can work with the priority queue. And we also need the I/O library because we're going to do some file reading. What we're going to do is we're going to read a file that contains a set of names and a gender designation. Let me show you what the file looks like. Let me pull my command prompt window up real quick. See if I can get this right the first time. There's the file where we have the sex and the name. And so what we're going to do is we're going to read these names from a file, store them into priority queues based on the sex, and then partner each man and woman up for a square dance. And then if we have anything left over in the queues, then we'll indicate that in the program. And we could use that as a basis for a simulation of how the square dance lines or the queues for dancers wanting to get into the square dance should operate. So let's go back to the program. We'll get started here. First thing we're going to do is set up our two priority queues, even though we're not going to use them for just a bit. We'll call them men and women. We're just going to copy that and paste it in and change the name. Save me a little typing right here. All right. Next, we're going to set up a couple of variables. We need a line variable to store our lines as we read them. We need a variable called file to store the name of our file. We need a variable to store the sex of the dancer. And then finally, we need a buffered reader object for our input file. Now we're ready to begin reading the file and storing the data in the priority queues. So we have to put file IO inside a try catch. The first thing we'll do is set up our input object, like so. Now we're ready to loop through our file. So while the line that we're trying to read is not equal to null, first thing we do after we've read a line is get the sex, and that's using the substring method. Pull out the sex of the dancer. And we check to see if it's a M for male. If it is, and we add the rest of the line, which we get with a substring 2, and add that to the priority queue for men. Otherwise, add it to the priority queue for women. Just like so. Close off the else, and close off the while. Close the file. Close the try. Then we need a catch, which we'll make very generic. We'll just write out a message saying couldn't open the file. And close the catch. So now we've got all of our dancers into the queues. So now we're ready to continue by working through the queues and partnering up the dancers. And we're going to do that while both queues are non-empty. And they both have to be non-empty. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull out a male and female dancer. And then we're going to announce who they are. That's what I'm doing right now, is setting up the output. So we do a poll on men and a poll on women. And that will announce the partners. Now, after that, we check to see if either of the queues is empty. And if the men is, for example, then we'll have to assume that there are going to be some women waiting. So we'll use the size method to say how many women are still in line waiting to dance. Then we'll drop down to the next line for more output. We'll do a print line here. And then we'll announce who the first woman in line will be. And that should get it all. Check my parentheses real quick. And then we'll write another if statement and essentially do the same thing with women. Let's see if I can copy and paste. That's always a challenge to get it right without leaving anything behind that's wrong for that particular situation. All right, so we're going to change this to men. All that's left to do now is close out public static void main and the class, save the file, and let's compile. And we see one error. Again, I like to leave these in as long as it's not too time-consuming to show you where you're going to make your mistakes. And this is a really easy one to make, leaving out this inside parenthesis in this while loop. This is all one statement right here, so I'm going to show it to you so you'll see it. And that's compared to not equal to null. That should fix most of our problems, I would think. Let's clear the screen and try it again. See another simple little error that we made. We left off a quote right here, and we left off a quote right there. So we fix that. Clear the screen. Compile again. There we go. So there are our pairs. And as you can see, we had 2 men left waiting to dance. Raymond Williams is the next man dancer. So this is an example of how to use a priority queue as a means of simulating a real-life queue situation, or a line, if you don't like to use the word queue. You could also run this in a more real-time situation where you have the user actually entering data as more people would come into the line. Like with 2 men waiting, you could have another woman come in, and then that would release the men at the front of the line with that woman, leaving 1 man. Or you could have 3 women come into the line at once. So that would get rid of the 2 men who were already waiting and leave 1 woman. And there's lots of things you can do with that, but we have time constraints here, so I wanted to give you the basics for setting up a simulation. And that's what we did in this exercise. And with that, we're finished with this chapter.